In the 7th edition of the APM Body of Knowledge, there's a couple of new terms associated with negotiation, and I've noticed these can cause a little bit of confusion for people. So I thought we'd just go through those now, and those new terms are zone of possible agreement, ZOPA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA, and win-win. So we're just going to go through these and clarify what we mean. So let's start off by thinking about the different parties involved in a negotiation. So you've got the seller, the person who's selling the services, and the seller's best case, ideal case, and worst case. So imagine you're doing a contract and you've done extra work. And you'd like to be paid for all the extra work that you've done, whether it was a client's fault or just because it was more difficult, and you've worked out that let's just choose a round figure, that there's £1 million of extra work that you've done as part of this contract, and you think you should be paid for all of that, including your profits. That's your ideal solution when you go to this negotiation. Your worst case or your fallback solution is that, okay, you might not get £1 million, but you know, looking at it, if you got paid the marginal cost of the work, not covering your overheads, so you didn't lose any money, and you know, sort of like genuine amount of work that you actually did that wasn't genuinely caused by the client, maybe you'd be willing to accept £400,000 of additional payments from the client. So that's your view as a seller. The buyer's point of view, so the sort of customer side, is, well, you know, I'm paying nothing. My ideal solution is I pay you nothing extra. I pay you the contract value, but I'm not paying any extras at all. But, you know, the client may say, well, actually, there were some extra bits of work that did occur that were, you know, excluded from the contract, and you did keep me informed, and you had the proper paperwork for all those, you know, they went through a proper change control. So, okay, fair enough, then I might be prepared to pay you an extra, say, £600,000 for that. And that's the maximum that my senior management team are willing to authorize. So, you know, it's very unlikely that the seller's going to get their £1 million, and it's very unlikely that you're going to get away with paying them nothing. But there is some potential. There is a zone of possible agreement, and that zone of possible agreement is somewhere between £400,000 and £600,000. I expect these numbers might be exaggerated, but you get the idea. So how do we find that zone of potential agreement? Well, this is where this book, Getting to Yes, is a guide, really, and I strongly recommend you read that book, because they talk about this win-win situation. And what they say is, actually, to get to a win-win, it's not often just about the money. It's often about the functionality or the timescales or the processes that are followed. So what they say is, you should barter. You should say, well, you know, offer something to this side that's valuable to them, and in return ask for something that you want, you know. So, you know, if we could agree this within the next 7 days, then maybe I could agree to pay a little bit more, you know. So to do that, you have to understand what's important to the seller and what's important to you, and what you can easily offer them that's important to them, and what you can ask for in return. So this barter agreement. So by win-win, we mean that we get a solution, the best solution that's right for everybody, and no one goes away unhappy. The earlier in the contract we do that, the better the easier it is to come up with a win-win. Once you get to the final negotiation of changes like this, it's probably unlikely that you're going to end up with a win-win solution, unless the seller says, well, you know, I'll offer you all this future work in return for solving the problem here, which is probably not allowed under procurement regs. So that's our zone of potential agreement and win-win. So win-win is finding the right solution for everybody. Now, as you can see, if our seller's worst case and our buyer's worst case don't overlap, then the zone for potential agreement reduces. So they might be only prepared to pay you a maximum of 550,000, and you may be only able to go down to 500,000. So that the zone with which we can reach an agreement is quite narrow. And I've chosen money, but it might be to do with the functionality, the performance, or the time scales, and probably a combination of all of those things. So this is where the non-financial, maybe if I can agree something on the intellectual property, so you can use some of the design information if you can absorb some of the costs yourself. So it's about fully understanding what each party wants. So it could be that there is no zone of possible agreement. So in that case, there is no overlap. So, the worst case the seller's able to accept is 550,000, and the worst case the buyer's prepared to pay is 450,000. And so there is no source of agreement. So what are we going to do now? Well, we could sit there all day, and if that's all you've been authorized to negotiate around, then you're not going to reach any agreement. So then we have to, before we go to that negotiation, we really need to discuss with senior management and other people involved what's our alternative. And that's what we mean by a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So the BATNA is what you're going to do if you can't reach a negotiated agreement with that party. So the seller's BATNA may be that, we're going to stop work and we're going to see them in court. And the buyer's BATNA might be that we're never going to work with that supplier again. So we're going to take them off our supplier list. Now, when do we need to think about these BATNAs? Well, it's probably ideal that we consider what our fallback plans are before we get into that negotiation room, because you can't make these up on the hoof. It's no good saying, oh, we're stopping work and we'll see you in court, and then you get back to the office and one of the directors or senior management says, well, why did you say that? There's this mega contract that we're going to win with them next. So ideally we need to work out with our senior managers and sponsors what's our ideal, what's our worst case, what's our negotiating zone, people might call that. And if we can't reach an agreement, then what's my fallback position? That might be just to escalate it up to the next level of management and say, well, we'll arrange a senior management meeting to discuss it if we can't solve it project manager to project manager. So that's what those terms mean. So zone of potential agreements. So what can we agree? What's the minimum and the maximum? What's my ideal solution and my minimum solution for both parties? If we can't reach an agreement, then what's my fallback plan? What's my BATNA? If we're not going to agree this today, then what action are we going to take? Are we prepared to stop work? Or and then win-win. What's the solution that gives both parties what they want? What's the trade-offs? What can I offer to you that's going to be valuable to you, and in return I can ask for things that I want that make it a better deal for me, really. So I hope you found that useful. A brief recap of ZOPA, BATNA and win-win.